Hey now, happy Friday. Hope you're having a good one. I'm sitting here with my big fat cat El Gato, and we're going to talk a little bit about, going to start off reviewing some things that we talked about Wednesday about color, and then we're going to talk a little about principles of design. On Wednesday, we talked about color and primary colors and secondaries and tertiaries, and the idea that there are different ways to define color, such as hue being a word like blue or green that describes the color itself, value describing the lightness or darkness of the color, and then saturation, which is the purity or the intensity of the color. So when you're talking about color, you're actually talking about these three different qualities, right? You've got hue, you've got value, and saturation, and then all three of those make up what we call color. On Wednesday, we also talked a little bit about the idea that there are additive and subtractive color mixtures. So the subtractive mixture is one we think about with pigment, where yellow and blue make green as the pigments mix together. The additive color mixture is when you mix lights together, red, green, and blue, that make lit displays such as the computer display that you might be looking at now, or digital projections are made up of this additive color wheel. The relationship of the colors on this wheel can be described by different color schemes. And color schemes are like layouts where an artist or a designer chooses which colors that they're going to use for different reasons. And they're defined in different ways. You can have what's called a monochromatic color scheme that uses just one hue or one chroma, one color, in order to make a design. You can have an analogous color scheme that means that the colors are right next to each other on the color wheel, or you can have a complementary color scheme, and that's when the colors are opposite each other on that wheel, and they all have different effects. Here's an example of a monochromatic color scheme. So monochromatic, one chroma. As you can see, there's not much color involved. There's one base color, and then there might be some different intensity, some different saturation, or some different value of that color, but that's the only one, and there's no other hue. An analogous color scheme uses colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. Here's an example of that. So these colors, if you were to make a color wheel or a graph and plot them next to each other, they would be neighbors. They would be right beside each other. So as a result, this piece is very harmonious, and it seems very calming. It's a color scheme that you might see in interior design. Next time you're in a house or a place where you feel really comfortable, just take a look at what the color scheme is. Maybe it's analogous. Another example of a color scheme would be complementary. And these colors are called complementary because they're opposite each other on the color wheel, and the effect that they have is they magnify each other, so they make each other more intense. Examples would be red and green, the Christmas colors. And here you can see that colors opposite each other on the color wheel are used in this piece, and the result is very exciting and it's dramatic, much more so than the analogous color wheel. Chapter 4 is about what we call principles of design. So those basic elements that we talked about in Chapter 3, if you apply those to rules called principles of design, you can make a composition. And these rules aren't really solid rules that artists follow, but if we go back and look at art that's been created, you can see some of these things at work. Examples of principles of design are contrast, which means difference, directional forces, the way a viewer's eye moves around the surface of a piece of art. Emphasis and subordination, which refers to one part of the artwork being more important and the other parts of the artwork just being there to support that one main idea. Balance, which could be visual balance on a flat two-dimensional surface, or it could be actual balance if you have a sculpture. Unity and variety help to balance each other out, And unity is about oneness of a composition. So everything there fits. It doesn't look like there's any extra material to the artwork. That unity is balanced out by variety. That gives the work some diversity and makes it more interesting and keeps it from being too repetitive or too predictable. They work well together. Example of that is this piece that has the number 5 repeated over and over and over again. So through the repetition of that form, and we'll talk about repetition as a design principle too, unity is created. Also, if you look at the way shape is used, it seems like there are a lot of triangles in the piece. Almost looks like broken glass where it's cut and fragmented. The shape that you see in the background is black and white. If you look carefully at that large number 5, it actually carries over into that as well. This piece by Jacob Lawrence, another great example of unity and variety in a composition. If you look carefully, you'll see the same shapes are repeated throughout the piece, like the rectangles that represent the train car windows, and the people that are sitting in the seats, often they are the same shape, and so we see that same shape repeated over and over again, and it gives us some unity. Look at the colors too, the use of red in the piece. So we have some red objects in the top and then also on the sides and the bottom that helps unify it. Also, there's some variety because each one of these shapes are often pointing in different directions. So if you look at the black and white breakdown that we've got here, you can see that series of triangles, but they're not all the same. The upright triangles are different, and the passenger that's reaching up for the bag also creates a nice bit of variety in that really unified composition. Here's another good example of unity and variety. Look at all the squares and rectangles. So just look at all those squares that are pictured on the floor, and we have that one-point perspective where it looks like we're looking back into deep space. Also, you'll notice behind the heads of the ladies there's a square on the wall, and then if you look at the rafters in the ceiling, these are also forming rectangles. Also the windows on the side, the fireplace in the background, all of these squares and rectangles helping to form unity within the composition. And each one is a little bit different. The squares, none of them are really the same size, and the rectangles are different shapes. So that helps also give variety to the piece. It's kind of fun to break the pieces down like the textbook does, so you can look at these basic shapes that you might not notice otherwise. Balance in artwork can be, again, it can be visual balance, which is on a two-dimensional flat surface like a drawing or painting, or it could be actual balance, which you would need if you were making a sculpture or a piece of architecture. When it comes to visual balance, the most common kinds involve what's called symmetry. So symmetry, or to be symmetrical, means that something is roughly the same on both sides. So most humans are roughly symmetrical. We look roughly the same on each side, not exactly the same, and many things in nature are symmetrical. Most trees look symmetrical. Butterflies, for example, I hope you don't cut butterflies in half, but you did, and you compared the two sides, you would see that they are very similar, so they have symmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance is common in artwork too, of course, and it's very common in architecture, which is a form of three-dimensional art. So when you look at a building, most of the time it's going to be symmetrical. Now that changes some as time goes forward. When you get in the 20th century and see different building designs, they get kind of stranger than this. But looking at classical buildings like courthouses and the Capitol building of the U.S., it's very symmetrical, so it's exactly the same on each side if you were to draw a line down the middle. Really common architectural technique. If an artwork is not the same on both sides, it could still feel balanced, but we call that asymmetrical balance, which just means not symmetrical. So asymmetrical artwork, instead of being the same on both sides, it relies on different things to make it balanced. So placement of objects is really important in asymmetrical balance, placement of colors, the use of lines. A lot of the artwork actually that we've looked at so far in this chapter is asymmetrical. Here's another example. This photograph, it seems balanced when you look at it. You don't really get a feeling of imbalance, but it's asymmetrical, so it's different on each side. One reason that this works is because the row of lights creates a line that's balanced out by the line of the crosswalk at the bottom. The red umbrella, that very careful placement in that particular part of the composition, helps balance it out. Sometimes artists will use what's called radial balance as well, and radial balance involves composing within a circle. So you're dealing with a round idea of balance. This is common in non-Western cultures. You see more circles used for artwork than you do in the West, where we tend to use squares and rectangles all the time. So radial balance is that idea of balancing in a circular plane like this, and it reminds us of things like the sun and the moon. An image does not have to be balanced. Imbalance could also be used as a way to express an idea. This photograph was taken by Robert Capa during the Spanish Civil War, and we see the man falling backwards, and it seems to be about unbalance. And when you look at the image, you'll notice that all of the action is over on the left side, and on the right side there's really nothing there. So the image itself helps make that statement about imbalance. Areas of an artwork can be emphasized or they can be subordinate. So you can have a focal point where you draw attention to and have the rest of the art kind of play a supporting role for that part. An example of that would be this piece. The area that's being emphasized is pretty obvious, is this image of the two figures in the front. So you have the figure on the ground in this very bright red and bright white outfit, and then the figure that's standing up. They're the largest things in the composition, so they draw the most attention. The tree in the background, what looks like a house on the hill in the back, and the road just play a subordinate role to that emphasized area. Directional forces guide the attention or the eye of the viewer through the composition. So directional forces might be created through the use of shadows. Instead of just depicting a shadow, an artist might be including that on purpose to get you to look in a certain direction. The shapes of objects, the placement of objects, all of these things can provide directional forces. In this piece, for example, lots of directional forces in which the viewer's eye or attention is moved around the composition. When a figure in a painting, for example, looks a certain way, we look that way too. It's just natural instinct. And so then once we look in that direction, we have a triangle that's formed by the pole and the station of the horses, and that kind of creates an upward movement that takes us up to the sun. Your eye might not do that, but it's kind of a neat diagram. Here's another example. Francisco Goya, one of his prints, The Bullfighter. Look at the careful use of line and shadows, and notice that the bull and the bullfighter, who's on a pole, make this arrow. So they're kind of pointing down at their own shadow. And then if you look at the shadow in the background, you'll notice that it kind of corresponds with the people that are up in the stands. This most likely isn't accidental. This is on purpose to create directional forces within the work. So a printmaker like Goya is an expert at doing things like this. And he may have been drawing a bullfight, and he just happened to see this scene where half of the crowd was sitting in half of the stadium and the shadows lined up a certain way. But chances are that he noticed what was happening while he was making this image, and he chose to use these directional forces. And the textbook again provides this neat example where they kind of break it down and draw out these different shapes that are created. Contrast means difference, and that could be the difference between light and dark. It could be the difference between black and white. It could be the difference between small things and large things. It just means difference. Sometimes contrast in photography, for example, is used to describe lighting situations. It could also describe color. Lots of different things. Just keep in mind that basically contrast means difference, no matter how you word it. Color contrast is what we see as the main contrast in this piece. Also, the lines are going in different directions. We could say that maybe that's a type of contrast, but this one, as far as contrast goes, probably about color. Very different colors, and some of them complementary colors, like we were discussing in the elements section of chapter 3. Color contrast can create beautiful and striking effects. This piece is by Damien Hirst, and what you're looking at looks like stained glass. It's actually butterflies. So he actually did, maybe that's where I got the idea, he bisected butterflies and he used them to create this composition. He likes to work sometimes with natural or organic objects, and it is quite beautiful. It's a little macabre, but very beautiful. Here's another example of contrast. Right now it's time for the Adjunct Faculty Art Show downtown in Radford, and I've got some work in there, so I'm going to go down and check out the show, and I'm going to try to get an interview with one of the artists that's showing work there. And we'll see if they'll agree to talk to me. Sometimes they don't talk to me, but I'm going to try my best, and if that happens, I'm going to include it either in this video or as a link. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, I guess our video today ended up being a little short. That's okay, we covered some things. I ended up at this place in Christiansburg called the Farmhouse playing bass with my band, and that's kind of how the night went. And still here, they give me a little bit of money and some food, and can't turn that down. Artwork and music and even sports or whatever it is that you do that makes you, it makes you forget about your troubles and really makes you live in the moment. That's art. So for some people it's making things like paintings and sculptures, and for other people it's doing things. And once you realize what your art is, and you can have more than one, certainly, you should do it as much as you can, because that's what life's about. Is once you find that thing and you're able to lock into it, it's going to open a lot of doors for you. You meet a lot of people that have the same interests and passions, and you meet people that make your life a lot better. And the key to it is finding your art and following that. It seems like kind of a voodoo concept, you know. Art is this kind of mystical thing, but it is. There's a Taoist idea that your path in life exists, and all you have to do is walk it. It's already there. And once you recognize it, as you walk on that path, that path continues to reveal itself to you, and you see things unfold that you might not have known were there before. So, yeah, I guess that's the gist of it. Had a great time tonight, and I hope you have a great weekend. And we'll talk about some more principles of design, and we'll talk about chapter 5 on Monday, which is about criticizing art and different ways that critics do that, and some different ideas that they approach it with. Maybe it is more interesting than it sounds. I hope so. So read that book. Take a look at that study guide for test number 1. It's on D2L content under study guides, and it's a good idea to
bring those terms with you to class, so that way as we go over something, you can just jot it down. And then for the test that's on Wednesday, it's going to be short answer, multiple choice. You can bring a 3x5 index card, and you can write or draw anything you want to on either side. So hopefully that'll help. Have a super weekend. Be careful out there. I'll see you on Monday. Thank you.